My name is Jenna Thatcher, and I'm 32 years old. 5 years ago, my mother called me 3 days before Thanksgiving and said 7 words that shattered everything I thought I knew about family. Don't come home this year. Victoria doesn't want drama. No explanation, no apology. Just a door slammed shut on 27 years of trying to belong. I spent that Thanksgiving alone at a restaurant in Boston, watching happy families laugh together, while I fought back tears over a cold turkey dinner. I had no idea that the strangers at the next table would become the family I had always dreamed of, and I had no idea that 5 years later, they would be introduced at my wedding as the parents of the bride, while my biological parents stood in the back watching, realizing they had been replaced in every way that truly matters. Let me take you back to the phone call that changed everything. November 21st, 3 days before Thanksgiving. I was in my tiny studio apartment in Boston, surrounded by half-packed bags and the scent of a pumpkin candle I had lit to get myself in the holiday spirit. I had already bought my plane ticket home to Connecticut, non-refundable of course. When my mother's name flashed on my screen, I smiled and picked up, but her voice was flat and cold from the very first word. She told me not to come home because Victoria was pregnant again and didn't need the stress. When I asked what drama she was referring to, she reminded me that I had once asked Victoria why I wasn't invited to her baby shower. According to my mother, that single question made me a problem. The line went dead before I could respond. I wish I could say it was the first time. But sitting on the edge of my bed staring at a useless plane ticket, the memories came flooding back. My 16th birthday party, canceled the morning of because Victoria had failed a calculus exam and needed emotional support. My college graduation, where my parents showed up 2 hours late because Victoria had a prenatal checkup that couldn't be rescheduled. I was the first person in my family to graduate with honors, and I walked across that stage looking out at empty seats. I had spent 27 years trying to earn a place at their table, bending myself into smaller and smaller shapes, swallowing my hurt, apologizing for having feelings. There was no amount of small that would ever be small enough. I called my father, hoping for something different. He already knew. When I asked if he thought I deserved to be at Thanksgiving with my own family, there was a long silence. He said it was better if I listened to my mother this year. Something inside me went very quiet, not sad, not angry, just empty. He had one chance to choose me, to say a single word in my defense, and he chose silence. I hung up. He didn't call back. Thanksgiving Day arrived gray and cold. I woke to the sound of my neighbor's family gathering upstairs, children laughing, the smell of stuffing drifting through the vents. My phone stayed silent all morning. Around noon, I made the mistake of opening Instagram. Victoria had posted a photo of the whole family around the dining table, everyone smiling. I zoomed in and counted the place settings. There wasn't even an empty seat where I should have been. They hadn't just excluded me, they had erased me like I had never existed. But something in me refused to spend the day in bed feeling sorry for myself. I grabbed my coat and found Harbor View Grill, one of the few restaurants in Boston still open on Thanksgiving. The warmth hit me like a wave when I pushed through the door. Roasted turkey, candlelight, families everywhere. The hostess led me to a tiny corner table and I opened the menu and tried to look like this was a choice. The family next to me was celebrating the way families are supposed to. An older couple at the head of the table, their son and daughter-in-law, 2 grandchildren, and a younger man around 30 who kept making everyone laugh. They passed dishes without asking and interrupted each other, the way only people who truly love each other can. I watched them out of the corner of my eye and felt something crack open in my chest. My turkey arrived looking perfect. I couldn't taste any of it. The tears came before I could stop them. I turned toward the window, pressing my napkin to my eyes, trying to disappear the way I always did. And then I heard a warm voice beside me. "Honey, are you okay?" The older woman from the family next to me was standing at my table. Silver hair, kind eyes. I told her it was just allergies. She raised one eyebrow, not judging, just knowing. Allergies don't usually make people cry into their napkin on Thanksgiving. She introduced herself as Eleanor. Then she said no one should eat alone on this day and invited me to join her family. I shook my head and said I couldn't possibly intrude. She said I wasn't intruding. She was inviting, and there was a difference. Her husband Richard waved from the head of the table. Her son Marcus grinned and confirmed that no one ever won an argument with her. I looked at my cold turkey, my empty table, my damp napkin. Then I looked at Eleanor Morrison and said, "Okay." They made room for me like I had always been there. Someone pulled up a chair, someone handed me a plate, and before I could sit down, I had a glass of wine and a warm roll in front of me. Richard told a terrible turkey joke that made the grandchildren burst into giggles. Marcus shook his head in mock embarrassment across the table, and I actually laughed, a real laugh, for the first time all day. Later, while the children ran off to explore the restaurant, Eleanor moved to the chair beside mine and asked how I was really doing. Something about her directness made me want to be honest. I told her my mother had called 3 days ago and told me not to come home, that my sister considered me drama simply for asking to be included. Eleanor listened without judgment, then told me something she had learned in 30 years as a family lawyer, that the people who accuse you of causing drama are usually the ones creating it. They just need someone to blame. Then she looked at me and said quietly, "You're not the problem, Jenna. You never were." Those were the words I had needed to hear my entire life. When the evening ended, Eleanor pressed her business card into my hand and invited me to Sunday dinner at their home in Brookline. Any week, no pressure. It took me a few weeks, but I showed up. Eleanor opened the door before I could change my mind and pulled me into a hug like it was the most natural thing in the world. That was the first of many Sundays. Richard taught me chess. Eleanor shared her secret pie crust recipe. Daniel's kids started calling me Aunt Jenna without anyone telling them to, and Marcus and I became the kind of friends who texted random thoughts at 2 a.m. and somehow always ended up sitting next to each other at dinner. I didn't hear from my biological family once, and for the first time in my life, I stopped noticing, because for the first time, I wasn't performing for love. I was just loved. 2 years later, Marcus took me back to Harborview Grill and told me across the table that he wanted to spend the rest of his life choosing me every single day. Then he pulled out a small velvet box. I said yes before he finished the sentence. From the corner booth, Richard and Eleanor sat beaming with champagne already poured. They had known all along. When wedding planning began, one question kept me up at night. The invitations would need a line for the parents of the bride. But Robert and Linda Thatcher hadn't spoken to me in over 2 years. They hadn't earned that honor. It was Eleanor who gently reminded me about adult adoption, a legal process where a consenting adult is formally adopted, creating a legal parent-child relationship with a new birth certificate and new next-of-kin status. I asked if she and Richard would consider it. She pulled me into her arms before I could finish the sentence and whispered that they had considered me their daughter since the first Thanksgiving. They were just waiting for me to be ready. When the judge signed the final order, I became Jenna Morrison. Our wedding invitations went out with a line I once thought I would never write: "Parents of the bride, Richard and Eleanor Morrison." Underneath, in smaller print, "The family who chose her." The wedding day was golden and perfect. June in Napa Valley, a vineyard ceremony, white roses everywhere. I had hired quiet security, knowing my biological parents had learned about the wedding and might show up. When they were spotted at the entrance during the reception, I made a decision. "Let them in," I told the guard. "But don't seat them with family. Let them see what they lost." When the MC announced the parents of the bride, my mother straightened up in the back, ready to be recognized. The name that rang out across the room was Richard and Eleanor Morrison. The applause was warm and immediate. From across the reception, I watched my mother's face go white. She pushed through the crowd until she reached me, voice sharp and disbelieving, demanding to know who those people were. I told her they were my legal parents and that I had been adopted 2 years ago. She said they couldn't just replace her. I told her calmly that I didn't replace her, she had abandoned me first. Richard stepped forward then, calm and steady, and said everything that needed to be said. He told her they hadn't stolen anything. They had picked up what she threw out. Security escorted them both toward the exit. Before they reached the door, my father turned back. For the first time in my life, I watched Robert Thatcher cry. He said he was sorry, that he had been a coward, that he had watched everything happen and done nothing. I told him gently that I knew he was sorry, but sorry didn't undo the years he had stood by in silence. Then I turned back to my wedding, to my husband, to my family. A year later, Marcus and I were painting a nursery sage green at our home just 20 minutes from Richard and Eleanor. When I told Eleanor we were expecting, she cried. Richard tried not to and failed. We had already chosen a name. Emily Grace Morrison. The Morrison part was non-negotiable. I wanted our daughter to carry the name of the family that had chosen her mother. 5 years to the day after I sat alone at Harborview Grill, I stood at the head of a full, loud, beautiful table at the Morrison house with Emily in my arms. When Eleanor asked me to give the toast, I looked around at every face at that table and said what I knew to be true. That 5 years ago I had believed I was unlovable. That a woman named Eleanor Morrison had walked up to my table and said no one should eat alone on this day. And everything changed. I raised my glass to family. Not the one we are born into, but the one we build. The one we choose. The one that chooses us back. If you are watching this and you have ever been called too much, too sensitive, always causing drama, just because you dared to ask to be treated fairly, I want you to hear this clearly. It was never you. You deserve to be chosen, not as a backup, not as an afterthought, but first and fully and without conditions. Setting boundaries is not revenge. It is not drama. It is simply choosing yourself when no one else will. I found my people. I hope with every